Hi, this is Elizabeth, one of the co-hosts of Beauties and Headcanons. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hello and welcome to your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. I'm Brice Burge.
I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco. Bryce, we got a Liga MX final set up. We got the women's national team rolling as they head to France for the World Cup. We got some coaching changes already for some big teams in Europe. And speaking of big teams, we're going to talk a little about Man City and maybe a little trouble they might get into.
There's a lot going on in the show, so we'll start off probably with the closer ones. We'll start off with Liga MX. Tigres wins on away goals. Lyon wins on away goals. All four games in the semifinals were 1-0 goals, or 1-0 victories for each team. Ultimately, Tigres and Lyon make it to the finals. There's a lot going on here, so why don't you break it down for us, Ivan?
Yeah, so you had Tigres, or let's start Leon, in the semifinals against Club America, the defending champions, and they split 1-1, both scoring, both winning away. Leon, because they were the higher seed, the number one seed overall, they get the tiebreaker because of that. Tigres in the other semifinal had against rivals Monterrey, who they faced off in the Champions League in the CONCACAF just a few weeks ago. They lose 1-0 the first game, and the second game, Tigres come back and win 1-0, and because they finished second and Monterrey finished third, tiebreaker again. Liga MX likes to reward the higher seed. If they're tied on away goals, they move on too, and so now you have the number one seed against the number two seed, an all-feline final. Meow. Leon against Tigres. Leon with a fantastic record this season, 13-2-2. Tigres not also great at 4-2. This is a great final. I mean, from anytime we talk Liga MX, you guys always hear me talk praise about Tigres and Monterrey. Leon coming with a little bit of surprise this season, but they've kind of showed it all entering the playoffs too, that what they did in the regular season was not an accident.
And when you look at what Leon did in terms of defense, least amount of goals allowed in Liga MX this season with just 14, and Tigres allowing just 16 as well. They were actually third on that list. Cruz Azul was the second place team in terms of goals allowed, but Lyon also brings the most goals scored, plus 27 goal differential to plus 17 goal differential when it's all put together for Lyon versus Tigres, 1 versus 2. Statistically, this looks like it's pretty set in my mind in terms of who's gonna win this one. But who do you think is going to come out on top?
I think Tigres are going to come out on top. I think just because they have a little deeper squad, a little more experience coaching wise as well. But this Leon attack has been, or the way Leon plays in general, has been fantastic. You have Cota in the goal, who's won championships before with Chivas. You have Joe Campbell, an experienced player who spent time in Arsenal, who's played in Europe, a Costa Rica centerpiece. You have Sambuesa in the midfield, kind of attacking midfielder, who has won championships with Club America and Liga MX. You have Luis Montes, who's kind of been that figurehead and that stallion in the middle for Leon all these years. And then you have this young gun in Jose Juan Marcas up front for Leon, who's had a breakout season for them this year. So they definitely have the weapons and they definitely have the squad to really put a good foot here in the finals. But I really like Tigres and the way they've kind of been able in the past Liga MX campaigns to win when they're in these final situations to get results.
That's all well and good, but I gotta flip the switch on this one. I really do think that Liga MX title is going to go with Lyon and keep the double L going on right there. What they were able to do against Club America, even though that they were down in that second leg early on, and they also suffered a red card later on too. I think there's just enough of a scare there that kind of negates that coaching mentality aspect of being able to be on the big stage. Lyon nearly threw it all away on that big stage by being down a man with 20 plus minutes to go, at home, and it's just they have the opportunity to break out of that. They have the ability now to have the difference in that mentality. This is a two-leg scenario. It's not a winner-take-all matchup either. So when you look at that, I think that Lyon has the ability to kind of grind it out and present themselves a little bit better than they have before, and it makes it more like a regular season game instead of this big title type matchup. I think that plays more into Lyon's hands, especially when you look at what Tigres has kind of done in the second legs of things so far. They've been okay, but they haven't shown their full potential. They've just kind of gotten lucky on like a set piece or place here or place there, and been able to put themselves in that position to get lucky. But I do think that Lyon will take it.
Yeah, I mean, Tigres have not played very well in these playoffs, both in the quarterfinals and the semifinals. They were tied on aggregate, and they've won, and they were tied on away goals, and they won because of being on the higher seed. And it's kind of like, but this is an experienced team. You have Ayala, who's been there before. You have Dueñas, you have Arquino, you have Guignac, you have Salcedo, maybe the best roster put together in Mexico. And the way these guys, and that's why I think, it doesn't matter how they played in the past in the situation, they have the ability to get it done. And especially after failing earlier this month in the CONCACAF finals, they want something to show for the season they've had. So I think it'll be a close battle. I think it's a coin flip, to be honest with you. And Leon does have the second leg at home, even though in the finals, away goals don't mean anything. So it's just a straight up head to head and aggregate kind of a thing without away goals. So that makes it more interesting as well. Tigres have not done fantastic this playoffs, but it kind of tosses up for a great finals. I think it's going to be great to watch. That's Thursday and that's Sunday. So if you guys like soccer, you're going to want to watch these two because it's killer.
9:45 Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, May 23rd, and 9:06. I got to give the rep to the UP area code there. It's always something that pops up. It's something that us Upers do to bring up 9:06 whenever it's a possible thing. But 9:06 p.m. start time Eastern Time on Sunday, May 26th. Will be the second leg of that final. I will definitely be watching the second leg of that final because it's going to be just an amazing game. Let's keep it on this continent, but bounce over to the United States Women's National Team. They played another friendly, again against a qualifying team from the World Cup, and again a statistical blowout in every single way, including 2 goals from Carly Lloyd to win 5-0 against the New Zealand Kiwis. Possession was 2/3 in favor of the United States, and shots. Here's the big one. 25-1. Total shots, 0 shots on goal for New Zealand. That big offense definitely coming out big for the United States. We've talked about it a lot. The standard question when we go into these friendlies is, what did we learn from each team going into this game?
We've learned that the women's national team are rolling. This is actually might be their best starting lineup. Could be the one we see in the opening game against Thailand. But we learned and we saw that their attack when they're going is hard. It's hard to beat for these other women's national teams. And this is 2 goals by Kylie Lloyd coming off the bench. I mean, when you have Kylie Lloyd coming off the bench, that just tells you how deep you are. and it shows how much attack you can have and how you can switch things up and give this new level of attack. And I mean, they still have another friendly also this week against Mexico. I think it's going to be a somewhat similar scoreline to this in New Zealand. But I just, they have such an ability to overwhelm these teams and to push them back and to not give them an inch. And they do such a good job of once they see that they have a team on the ropes, they don't back off. They keep going and going and going. And that's such a great trait to have. I mean, that's not something I learned, but it's something that I thought was reintroduced and reshowed, and just kind of, it's nice if you're a women's national team fan to see that when these ladies see that there's an opportunity to go for the kill, they go for the kill.
One thing that I noticed that could be negative, because we talk about the positives all the time, and there's not a big opening here for negatives, but one that did pop up is that the United States had 7 offsides. And there was that timing aspect in terms of their deep passes when they were opening up. They had a number of them that hit. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of positives with it. But 7 offsides is a little much. And so do you think that this is kind of the possible loophole in this high-scoring offense approach by the United States, using their offense to their advantage? Could you possibly see more teams try an offside trap?
No, I think because part of that, I think, comes from when you're attacking so much, you just kind of get the anticipation of knowing, oh, here comes the next attack, we'll catch you offsides like that, especially when you're just so dominant over a team. If that makes sense, you just almost, it's like an almost eager compared to if you're offside. So if you're offsides more in a more even game, it's kind of like a lack of discipline. When here, I think it's just a more of a fact that they're so aggressive and they feel, they smell blood so much. That's kind of where you can get cut off sides just a little too much. Just kind of everything's coming so easy, and then the one time you get just a little cut up, it happens. But I don't think it will be a problem going into these other games. Again, it's hard to measure just because we expect the women's national team to do this against New Zealand, and we know that their challenges are the Frances of the world and, the Englands of the world. So it'll be interesting. But I like the starting lineup. I think Ertz is fantastic in that kind of defensive midfielder role, covering the back line, which I still think is a little suspect, but wasn't challenged this game. And the fact they don't play with a natural left back is still something that'll be interesting. If there's a team that can challenge them in possession or challenge them in the counter, that's a spot that could be a weak link for them. But I mean, besides that, I didn't see a lot of things that negatives from this, and it'll be interesting to see what changes they make to the next game and what players get a chance to kind of impress Ellis before they head to France.
We got about a minute or so to wrap up this segment, but I do want to talk a little bit about New Zealand. New Zealand, on the other side of this, is a World Cup qualifying team. They're in the same group, Group E, with Netherlands and Canada. A lot of people kind of thought that New Zealand could hang with those two teams enough to get either an at-large bid or maybe even shock and surprise and get a second spot in that group. It's one of the more competitive groups moving into it, along with Cameroon. But that being said, you now start to question that with the performance that they had against the United States in this 5-0 blowout.
I'm not sure because, they beat a good Norway team. They play Mexico the day of recording. And if they can get a good result against Mexico, I think this might be more one-off. They're also playing England on June 1st. So that'll be an interesting result to keep an eye on if you're from New Zealand. This could just be a one-off game where, they're playing the United States at home. And, when you're playing United States at home, it's one of the best crowds you're going to get in women's soccer. And maybe they kind of got overwhelmed. And once the wheels started coming off, it all just kind of blapped out. And again, you're not going to find many offenses of the quality of the U.S. in the World Cup coming up. So maybe they just kind of ran through a buzzsaw.
That being said, they do have to go up and play Canada in this group. I think for the people that care about the Canadians on this podcast, that we try to keep up with at least the Canadians and the Mexicans and the United States, all continental North American teams evenly. I think if you're Canada right now, you've got a little bit of hope just because that was a game that could potentially be a trap game for you, and then you see this and you see that there's a definite blueprint to beat a team like this. I think that gives a little bit of extra edge there for Canada when you think about the experience that they have up in their front forward attack, and that is a great opportunity for Canada to get the wins to move out of that group stage definitively.
Also, yeah, quick on Canada. They're entering this World Cup on a nice little streak. They beat Scotland in the Avigar Cup. They beat Sweden in PKs. They beat England. They beat Nigeria, and they just beat Mexico 3-0. So they're rolling and finding their pace as well. Not in the blowouts the way United States are, but they're finding good quality wins. And the matchup against Spain on Friday is going to be a great one too. A good way to challenge them and see where they're at.
This does it for this opening segment. When we come back on Your Soccer Passport, presented by Public House Media, we'll talk about things across the pond in club soccer. You're listening to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media.
This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
And welcome back to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. I am Brice Burge. You can find me at that Brice Burge on Twitter. Brice is spelled with an I. Ivan Sanchez is also here. He's the other stalwart on this show. You can find him on Twitter at Ivan Sanchez C90. He is a lot more active on Twitter than I am. He is definitely worth a follow, though. Though I can't imagine you being as active now with Portland having so many issues.
Oh, God, my heart.
Yeah, so I'm glad you were able to make it to the podcast in between your bouts of sobbing.
Yeah, I know. We made it through. They went out fighting. They went out like they should.
So, well, you went farther than my Pacers did. We were dead in the water after Oladipo got hurt. So
that's true.
But let's talk about soccer. That's what this is about. Your Soccer Passport. So we'll head to the European continent here because there's some interesting shakeups going on in the top leagues, both in England and in Italy, namely around Maurizio Sarri. If he leaves Chelsea and goes to Juventus, how does that kind of trickle on down throughout the rest of the continent? So what can you tell us about this, Ivan?
Yeah, I think the first thing is an important step that Max Allegri has parted ways with Juventus amicably, apparently, with him no longer continuing as Juventus coach, which I think is kind of a big news when you think about the success he's had with Juventus and all the titles they've won, league titles. I think part of it has to do that they haven't been able to make it past. They haven't been able to win Champions League with Ronaldo. They spent all this money on Ronaldo this past year, and then they lost in the quarterfinals. And from there, now you have this humongous vacancy in one of the biggest clubs in the world. And one of the names being thrown around for there is Sarri from Chelsea, because it looks like Chelsea and Sarri still don't look eye to eye on where the club is. It seems like the fans are unhappy. And the rumor is that former club player Frank Lampard would be the one being hired if Sarri leaves or if they decide to fire him after the Europa League. And it just kind of, there's a huge trickle down and this big effect with Chelsea and how they're so unbalanced. And you also have this huge opening on Juventus and then the trickle down from there. And then essentially you have fans who aren't happy with Chelsea and the product that was produced with Sarri. You have a coach who, I'm not sure if care less is the right word, but he's a maverick. He's not gonna. His dream was never to coach in the EPL, so I think he'd be fine leaving Chelsea because I think coaching Juventus might be a bigger deal for him as well. So there's all these very moving parts, and it's very interesting, especially with a club like Chelsea, who has been up and down all season long, and they're about to lose. They're probably about to lose Hazard. He's made it pretty clear that he doesn't want to be there. So it's just a crazy situation with all these cards on the table, all spread out, and there's no real order into what might happen.
For me, I look at it. I mean, even though that Sarri has said like publicly he's willing to stay there and grind it out, I think that he's not opposed to staying in Chelsea so much as he might want to do something else. Is the way that I've kind of gotten it. Especially going back to Italy, this is something that I think would mean more to him in terms of the kind of job that he's looking for. Because Chelsea is still a really attractive job for somebody, especially with Christian Pulisic coming in and joining the team. I think he showed up the day of recording as all this was kind of going down. But if he does go to Juventus, and that kind of changes things up, then this big aspect of what Chelsea was this year is it's almost a dead year for Chelsea in terms of what they were expected to do versus what they actually did. And Chelsea was part of that group of 4 teams that were fighting to not win third place.
But they won it though. So that's the thing. They're in the Champions League, and they don't have to qualify or anything. They don't do a qualifying playoff. They're right in the group stage now. Something they weren't in last year. So, one of the goals were checked off. Now they were very much behind City and Liverpool, and there were bumpy times, and it wasn't pretty for a lot of the season. But a goal was achieved to make the Champions League with Sarri.
And he did that. It just, I don't know what else he could gain by staying there. That's what kind of bounces back and forth, is that it seems like it'd be best for everybody if there was a change, just because like even though that's a really high priced idea of what the a bridge type manager scenario would be, I can't imagine anybody saying that we could rally together and do something greater than what we've already done in Chelsea right now. There's a lot more opportunities in Juventus for Sarri. There's a lot more opportunity to bring back a fan favorite for the fans in Chelsea. It just seems like it's too good of a thing not to pass up on all sides. I think the big question though is, does Juventus actually want Sarri or not? And that's a completely different standard, because they have said that there are some other coaching candidates that are not excluded yet. That could potentially be involved, including managers from inside Serie A in Italy as well. So, do you think that this is Sarri's job to lose in Juventus? Is this a guaranteed thing for him to make the jump?
I think he's one of the stronger candidates to get it. Number one, he pushed Juventus to the brink 2 years ago and 3 years ago with Napoli. Which I think holds high in Italian football, which is important. I think he is higher regarded in Italy as well, which is very important as well. He has an attractive style. He has a more offensive style of play. It'll be interesting if he can fit what he wants to do with the players that Juventus has. But I think, I'm not saying it's his to lose, but I definitely think he's one of the higher candidates, and he should be highly considered for this. And you make a great point about how there's probably nothing more to gain for anybody involved at Chelsea with Sarri being there. It kind of seems like this relationship has been spoiled for everybody, the fans, the front office, the players, and the manager. So probably the best thing for him would be to leave. He leaves them in a way in a better spot than when he found them, because they are in Champions League. With that said, I think over the years, I think Chelsea has kind of lost some of their world power luster. I think there's more attractive teams in the world. I think now, too, when you have teams like Real Madrid who are going to enter the market again in a way they haven't entered it in almost half a decade, that kind of hinders them as well a little bit more, too. I mean, they're going to lose their best player in Hazard. So I think Sarri will be better off than Chelsea's going to be better off when they split up, if I'll say it like that.
Now, the other big news kind of coming from the other side of the pond too is some new things popping up about Man City. They could possibly be getting a Champions League ban for what they were doing with financial fair play regulations. Both them and PSG in France were being investigated. UEFA President Alexander Seferin has now said that if the rules are broken, it doesn't matter how big of a team, they're still going to be punished for that, which includes but not limited to a one-season ban from the Champions League, and how that kind of shakes things around. It's an interesting setup because this is not the first time that City has been hit with something like this before. They were fined and restricted on transfer window spending after they initially did it in 2014. But while this has kind of gone on, it really has been less about what Man City has done and more about how UEFA looks into the investigative process and whether or not they can treat people fairly, at least in terms of how it's recently come about. What are your opinions on this? Because when I look at this and I see the tale of two stories, it's an interesting development because I can't really discern myself about whether or not this is more about UEFA procedures or if this is more about Man City and to a lesser extent PSG.
I'm going to go with more how UEFA handles it because I think the fact, it kind of seems, or what it seems like, the owners of both PSG and Man City are essentially funneling the country's money into the club teams, which makes then both teams seem to be lying about where the revenue is coming or where the money is coming from and trying to balance the books. I think UEFA probably knows this, and it's more about UEFA and do they have the moral compass, which they usually don't, to really put the hammer down on this, which they usually don't either. And I think part of the reason why these teams have kind of felt that they could get away with it or do this or push the boundaries of the laws is because UEFA has had a limp punch when it comes to handing out punishments besides transfer bans here or there, which big clubs have gone, like Barcelona and Atletico and Real Madrid, but nothing to this standard, but nothing to like this level of banning them from the Champions League for a year, which is huge. It's huge for both. And they kind of both got into this next level of European standards around the same time. So it's interesting to see how City and PSG, to an extent, have both kind of been under investigation for this. It's always kind of been not known, but not surprising that this could happen. So that's why I think it's more on UEFA to see what they actually do. What do you think?
I don't know. And the reason why I do this is because when you deal with federal and international soccer governing bodies, you almost have no faith in them to do the right thing to begin with. It's the biggest, black spot on this sport is about how these international relations groups and governing bodies exist. And we've seen it in Uruguay. We've seen it in Norway. We've seen it in the U.S. We've seen it with Sepp Blatter. We've seen it with the Caribbean nations. We've seen it all over the world. It does not shock me that they are dealing with it now in here. What would shock me is if it was actually true to their word. My question is it too big of a punishment anyway? When I look at something like this, I don't necessarily know if the Champions League play is the best way to deal with it because of the implications of what that would have on the rest of the EPL. It would mean that a lower grade team like a Manchester United would get in instead to the Champions League, or bump up and they get into the Europa League and somebody else moves up into the Champions League. But ultimately, when I look at the scenario, I'm not sure if there's enough there to punish just Man City by itself without having numerous beneficial aspects for somebody else. And that always makes me question about whether the punishment fits the crime. And I can't find a way that they're going to be able to do this. If this is truly to the extent that they're claiming and alleging, then I'm not really sure what the right process is here to begin with to know if it's the right thing to do for the governing body.
Yeah, but they got to do something. They can't just put a little slap on the wrist for them.
they got to do something. I mean, I realize that, but like everything, I'm so jaded by everything else that like, if you're actually talking about due process, what is due process at this point? We're not actually talking about how they're investigating. We're not talking about their investigatorial procedures. We're not talking about how it fits in with British and French laws or international trade laws or anything like that. We're talking about the governing body doing its own investigation. In the United States, you see the NCAA, and there is not a single person in the United States that thinks that the NCAA can deal with any kind of amateur athlete situation and think that, hey, I'm going to punish a kid on the golf team because he hooked up a hose to the university faucet and washed his car, and now I'm going to take away his scholarships. There's not a single person that believes that in the United States with the NCAA. There's not a lot of people in the world that think that there's going to be a due process involved for the rest of this stuff. So just trying to figure out what the process is involved in investigating is even bigger than whether or not UEFA is willing to assess penalties, because they haven't shown that they are functional. They haven't shown that they are competent. They haven't shown that they are willing to do any of the right things so far with any of their past investigations, that when you're talking about punishment for those investigations, I really don't care, because you've put the cart before the horse, and it just cannot string together these possibilities in any kind of logistical sense.
Just a blind leading the blind, baby. What more do you expect? I mean, I understand what you mean, and we're all going to look at this in a jaded manner to begin with. But I mean, yeah, and anything, and the truth is too, any punishment won't be handed down probably won't be affected this coming year. At the very least, it'll be in 2 seasons from now. So there's still a lot of wait and see. And that's the thing with these things. They take forever, and it's all, you can't trust, when they haven't shown a track record of doing the right thing or having a due process, you don't expect them to all of a sudden do it now with this situation. So yeah, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see, only because I think everybody already has a perception that nothing's going to be done. So I mean, that's my opinion on it.
And that's the balance about it all. And so, like, due process and a process are 2 different things. And if your punishment is based on a process and not due process, then it's an unjust punishment. And it doesn't matter if the person did things right or wrong. If the process is that bad, then it's just a joke from the get-go. And I think that's going to be the bigger issue right now in dealing with this.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, that will do it for this week here on Your Soccer Passport. Went a little bit longer on time, but Ivan, you got some time for your shout-out. Why don't you take it?
My shout-out is to all those Game of Thrones fans. You guys all seemed really upset for how your show ended, so sorry you guys put in all those years, and a lot of you left a little disappointed. Keep your heads up. That's my shout-out.
You know what? It's hard being a Vikings fan. It's hard being a Game of Thrones fan. It's hard being a Detroit Lions fan. You get used to these years of disappointment after how that show ended. It was tough. I don't even watch the show, and I was disappointed with how it ended. That's how bad it was.
That's what I hear. So my heart goes out to you guys. That was a lot of time, a lot of years, and a lot of hours invested on watching a show to be left, little sad, little limp in the hand. So sorry, guys.
Yeah. Well, that's a note to end on. All right. That's Ivan Sanchez. I'm Brice Burge. You've been listening to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media.